I came that you may have life, life to the full. That's what Jesus says in John chapter 10, verse 10. In other words, he's saying, I came that you may have abundant life, life in all its fullness, life the way it was meant to be. Richard Dawkins shocked the world on Easter Sunday during an interview where he proclaimed himself to be a cultural Christian. If you don't know who Richard Dawkins is, he's one of the most famous atheists of our age. He wrote a book many years ago called The God Delusion, in which he talked about belief in God, including belief in Jesus, as a pernicious superstition. And to be clear, in that interview, Dawkins says that he still thinks that it's delusionary to believe in Jesus, to believe that he is actually God incarnate, to believe in the virgin birth or the resurrection. He doesn't buy into any of that stuff. He still thinks that that is utter nonsense. But what he said in that interview, which is so striking, what's a stunning reversal that shocked the world, shocked so many people who know who Richard Dawkins is that he used to blame Christianity, or all religions, for most of our modern social ills, for all the problems we have, for the way that humanity is so broken. But now he seems to be saying that there is merit, there is value in it, and he's worried, he's actually concerned. In that interview, he expressed a lot of angst about the fact that he thinks his Christian culture in the UK, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, where he lives, is being eroded away. And he fears that as that happens, the value his Christian culture has will be eroded away as well. And the value he pointed to, in addition to some nostalgic and aesthetic things, like he likes apparently Christmas carols and the Christian hymns, he appreciates those things. But the real serious thing he was pointing to is the fact that Christianity has brought, for all its problems, has brought to his culture and to any culture it's touched, this sense of the dignity of the person, of seeing other people as having some kind of equal dignity, even with all the flaws in its history, even with all its own patriarchalism or ways that it has marginalized people. Overall, the net effect has been to create a sense of radical equality among people, of seeing the radical, true dignity of each and every human being. And that's why Dawkins now wants to consider himself a cultural Christian, and is arguing in his culture for his own people in Great Britain and the UK to retain, to appreciate this Christian culture, even if they don't believe any of the utter nonsense of the Christian belief system, to keep this culture, because he says he prefers what this belief system does, the Christian religion does, to culture, to any other belief system there is. That's what's so stunning about his comments. He says that he prefers the Christian belief system, its impact on society, culture, civilization, to any other belief system out there. I came that you may have life and have it to the full. The Vatican just released a document, which it's got a fancy Latin term, but if you translate it, it means infinite dignity. And in it, Pope Francis has written eloquently about the need to see all people having that kind of infinite dignity, and kind of challenging the world, because we so often don't. He talks very poignantly about the drama of poverty and how so many people in our world are living in impoverished conditions, and they are just invisible to the rest of the world. In that document, he makes a really interesting move, because unlike most documents like that, where people are talking about the dignity that human beings have, unlike most of those kinds of documents which ground the dignity of the human person in Genesis, the book of Genesis being made in the image of God, instead, Francis grounds it in the incarnation, in the fact that God in Jesus became a human being, that God took on all our human weakness and vulnerability, and even went to the extent of dying for us in order to save us. He says that is the source of our infinite dignity, not so much just being made in the image of God, but the fact that God would do that for us. Because, Francis says, if God would do that for us, then that means that we must be infinitely precious to him. If God so loved the world this way, then we must be infinitely precious to God. And that's the source of our infinite dignity. Our dignity isn't something that we somehow give ourselves or assign to other people. It is by virtue of God's grace. It's something he bestows upon us. And as Francis is arguing, primarily essentially through, most importantly, through the incarnation. I came that you may have life, life to the full. But even though we all sense deep down that we should be seeing one another as having this equal dignity, this infinite dignity, even though Dawkins is onto something and wanting to be a cultural Christian and talking about the impact of Christianity, that any culture Christianity touches, it kind of instills this as a cultural value, so much so that it can become self-evident in many cultures. People just think it's a truism and not realize that the source of it is the incarnation. As much as all that is true, and that we should see one another as having this infinite dignity, that is the way we were meant to live, that is the fullness of life, there's this huge chasm between that, the way we should live, and the way we actually live. When we look at our world, we see how broken it is, how invisible so many people are to other people, how oppressed and marginalized so many people in our world are. But we don't just see it out there in the world, we see it in here, in our hearts. Because if we're honest, when we go through our daily lives, many people, so many people, are often invisible to us. We just don't really see them. And when we do see them, we often see them as a means to an end, as somehow getting our desires fulfilled through them, as using them to get something else that we want. We really don't see them. And that points to the brokenness of the human condition, because we know all this, and we've known this for decades, centuries, eons actually, as long as human beings have been around. We know there's this great chasm between what we should be and what we actually are. And that's why what Dawkins is talking about has kind of a dissonance to it, where he talks about being a cultural Christian but not believing in the Christian faith. The problem is that Christianity says you can't do that. You can't have Christianity without the beliefs, because it's not just knowing, being aware of what you should do that enables a Christian, truly Christian culture, that attitude of seeing the infinite dignity of other people. You need to be enabled to do that. You need a Savior who will enable you to do that, because the human condition is so broken, we can't do that on our own. And all you have to do is look around or look in your heart to see that, because until you are convinced that you are infinitely precious to God, you will never be convinced that anyone else is infinitely precious to Him. Until you are convinced that God loved you so much that He was willing to become human and die on a cross for you, that is your dignity, that you have an infinite dignity because He loved you to that degree. He paid an infinite cost, made an infinite sacrifice for you. Until you're convinced in the depth of your being, the depth of your soul, that that's true, you will never be convinced that anyone else is infinitely precious to God either. You will never be convinced that they have an infinite dignity either. But once you do become convinced that you are this infinitely precious to God, once you put your trust and faith in Jesus, once you trust Him as your Savior, as loving you that much and making it possible for you to be reconciled to God, then you can't help but seeing everybody else as having this same infinite dignity. You can't help but wanting to love them the way that you have been loved in God. And that's the key to the fullness of life that Jesus promised. That's the key to living the way we were meant to live. That's what fixes the brokenness of our human condition. That's what enables us to do the things that Richard Dawkins now is so worried are being eroded from his civilization. That can only happen when you actually believe in the incarnation, when you actually believe that there's a God who loves you this much. I came that you may have life to the full. Want proof? Want proof that transformation takes place when people do actually believe in Jesus? Well, for all the problems Christianity has had, and God knows through the ages there have been many, many shameful episodes within Christian history, overall the net effect has been massively more positive in terms of its impact on the world. In fact, as many historians have acknowledged for a long time, and a couple of books recently have made the point in very powerful ways, dramatic ways, laying out the evidence in just completely compelling, undeniable ways, What Richard Dawkins is now just discovering is that the source of our understanding that each person has dignity, that each person has an equal dignity to one another, that we have an infinite dignity, the source of that is Christianity. It doesn't come from any other belief system. It comes from Christianity. And any culture that Christianity has touched has been infused by this, not perfectly, but where people have authentically lived their faith, where they have entrusted their lives to a Savior who assures them that they are infinitely precious to God, their lives have reflected that. And that, to the extent that society has been filled with those people, that's changed societies. For example, the idea that charity is a virtue, that's something Christianity introduced. The idea that we should be concerned for the poor, that's something, the source of that is Christianity, is the incarnation. The idea that women and children in particular should be seen as having equal status, equal dignity as men in society, that's a uniquely Christian contribution to culture, to the world. But in addition to enabling people to love this way, to see each other with an infinite dignity, Christianity also has brought a way of achieving fullness of life that no other belief system is capable of bringing. Philip Yancey is a journalist who has had the opportunity during his long career to interview many celebrities, many movie stars, musicians, rock stars, athletes, professional athletes. But he's also had the opportunity to interview and be with, spend time with many people who are involved with Christian service, dedicated their lives to Christian service. So doctors who are working with leprosy patients, to healthcare workers working with AIDS patients, to relief workers in some of the poorest places of the world, to people who run homeless shelters. And what he says is that overall, the time that he spends with the celebrities, that those tend to be some of the most miserable people he knows. But when he spent time with these people who've given up everything to follow Jesus, people who have trusted their lives to him and denied themselves and made huge sacrifices to see the infinite dignity in other people and actually do something about it, he says, not only does he admire them, not only do they inspire him by this act of great love that they're doing, but he's jealous of them. He's envious of them. He finds himself envying them anytime he's around them because he says they have a joy. They're living life to the full in a way that he longs to. Because of their faith, their Christian faith, they know the fullness of life. They know the way life is supposed to be lived. We in our consumeristic society think that giving up everything to follow Jesus, even just not even its possessions things, just entrusting yourself to him, that is going to make you miserable, that it's going to diminish you, that it's going to make your life so much tinier, so much smaller, so much less full, when in fact the reality is, the proof experientially, empirically is, that when you do that, you live life to the fullest for the first time. You live life the way it was meant to be for the first time. You know real life, true life, abundant life, fullness of life. I came that you may have life, life to the full. Yes, Jesus did come to enable us to have that. That's why we need Jesus. That's why we need a Savior, because he can fix our brokenness. He can assure us, convince us that we are infinitely precious to God, because when we see him, God, coming in the flesh and then giving his life on the cross for us, paying that infinite price for us, we know in the depth of our being, in a way that can transform us, that can truly change us, we know in the depth of our being that God truly loves us, that he loves us that much, that we must have, if he would do this for us, we must have an infinite dignity. And that changes everything. That transforms us. And as it transforms more and more of us, it begins to transform our world. I came that you may have life, life to the full. He did come to give you that life. If you haven't experienced it yet, if you long for it, if you want to live life the way it was supposed to be lived, if you're tired of being such a broken human being who can't see the infinite dignity in others, who has trouble seeing the infinite dignity in yourself, feeling infinitely precious to God, then look to him, turn to him, trust him, because when you see your God doing what he does for you, when you believe that, it will transform you from the inside out It will give you that abundant life. It will enable you to live the way you were always meant to live. So what do you think about Richard Dawkins' stunning reversal in claiming to be a cultural Christian? I would love to hear your thoughts on that, especially whether you think you can be a cultural Christian without believing in Christianity, as Dawkins is now claiming. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. You can go to the contact EJ page of the Raising Jesus website and leave your comments there. I look forward to hearing from you.